Let's try and put the prior lesson to the test and try to estimate the number of taxis in Manhattan. I want you to take some time and as much time as you need to estimate the number of taxis in Manhattan. Now, just some clarifications here. This is normal time, so we're not thinking about anything pandemic related, for example. And also, in addition to that, we're not looking at taxis at any one specific point in time, how many are on the road, but really just how many taxis exist in Manhattan. Essentially, you can think about this as, how many taxis are needed to service Manhattan total. Okay. Now, again, take some time to work through this problem. If you can, try to come up with both a top-down approach and also a bottom-up approach. And when you are ready, and only when you're ready, come back and join me to see what a good market sizing looks like. Now, if you're ready, let's proceed. And I'm going to take you through what a top-down approach first looks like for how many taxis are in Manhattan. Now, what we want to do is we want to try to think about the population of Manhattan and then think about their usage of taxis and how many taxis would be required in order to meet that demand. This is sort of a classic top-down approach. So what we first need to do is estimate the population of Manhattan. We know that New York is probably 5, 6, 7 million people large. Manhattan is the largest or one of the largest boroughs in New York. And so 2 million seems like a reasonable estimate. Then what we want to do is we want to think about the types of commuters or types of taxi users that we will have here. And really, we can think about them as business users and leisure users. Business users are going to be grabbing taxis during the weekday, unless they're unfortunate. And leisure users are going to be taking taxis during the weekday and on the weekend. We're splitting this up because the usage rate is probably going to be different. Again, we don't bother with business users on the weekend because there shouldn't be too many, and unfortunately, those guys are not going to be counted. Now, if we break it down this way, then we can think about there being 2 or 3% of the population of Manhattan actually using taxis as part of work, right? If we think about business users, we have to think of more of your office workers, white collar, and we also have to think about them being able to afford a taxi day in and day out. Of course, we're considering the commute into and out of the city, but also potentially hopping in between meetings. In terms of leisure users, we can think about this size as being larger, right? We think about people after work going and getting dinner with somebody or going to yoga class or something like that. So we can think about there being about 100,000 leisure users in any given week that would use the taxi during the week. And then in terms of leisure users, we would surely expect the number of people that are eligible to take a taxi to increase significantly. So let's go with 200,000 or 10% of the population of Manhattan. Right? You have to remember a lot of people are going to be taking the metro, the subway, the bikes, walking, etc. So as we dive into this, we want to think about the rides per day. Now, it's quite logical to think that a business user, if they're using the taxi, are probably going to be riding about 2 times a day, right? To go into work and to leave work, right? Or maybe they're hopping in between meetings. In terms of the leisure weekday workers, surely a leisure individual who is not going in and out of work is not going to go out every night. If they are, maybe they're sharing with people. And so let's put this at a quarter. And then in terms of leisure weekend users, right? If they're riding, it's to go out at night, maybe they're going with a group of friends, and so they're going to share. So let's put that at half, okay? Now, I want to pause here because I know that I have explained to you prior that you should not be guessing when you do market sizing. I want to iterate here. I'm not guessing, right? I have a general sense, right? Do I know whether business users ride once or 3 times a day? No, of course not. Do I know whether there are 50,000 or 100,000 or 25,000? No. But am I, putting a finger in the air and just guessing which way I need to go? No, not at all. So these numbers are within the realm of reason. Even if we're not that confident about them, you could still consider them an estimate that would be within the realm of reason, okay? Adding up all of these together, some will be a little bit higher than the truth, some will be a little bit lower. But as we add them up, they should average out to be correct or correct enough. So I just wanted to pause there to explain that before we move forward and before you start to think, okay, so I'm just supposed to come up with random numbers. No, we actually do think about these numbers critically and we estimate, we don't guess. Now, what we can do with these numbers is then we can try to estimate the total rides in a week. Of course, the business weekday users, we will multiply by 5. The leisure ones, we will multiply by 5. And the leisure weekend, we will multiply by 2. And that will get me the following numbers. Now, add those all together and then divide by 7. And then you will get the number of rides per day. Remember, we're trying to estimate the number of taxis in Manhattan. And so what we're trying to do is get the total number of rides per day to really understand this from a demand perspective. Now, then what we might want to do, and this is a little bit optional when it comes to this market sizing. That's because this market sizing is already a little bit long. It's a little bit extensive. You can either choose to break down the population of tourists, or you can multiply the end number by some figure. Maybe you figure that the general population of Manhattan uses taxis X amount, and you're going to add 20% to that number to account for tourists. That's perfectly reasonable as long as you can defend your estimated percent. I'm just going to show you really quickly how we might break down tourists, and it goes as follows. We can think about there being about 10% of the total population of Manhattan in the form of tourists at any given time. Again, this is an estimate. Then we want to think about socioeconomic status. So probably 3 times as many travelers are going to be budget conscious than the amount that are not going to be budget conscious. And if we think about rides per day, of course, that's going to be directly correlated, right? Which is another tip that you have learned already. The luxury travelers, if we're thinking about this, they might be traveling with family and friends, but they're probably using taxis a fair bit. So let's put it at 1 per day. And then the budget traveler, of course, taxis are going to be few and far between. If and when they do take it, they will probably be sharing with people. So that brings us to 87,500 rides per day. Now we get to the max demand equation. So if we think about it, we want to figure out how many rides there are and then how much, taxis we need to meet this demand. So from my personal experience, well, riding taxis, I think an average ride is about 30 minutes, give or take. And that adds up to 100,000 total hours. And just from my conversations with taxi drivers, I know that taxi drivers work about 10 to 12 hours per day, but they work 5 or 6 days a week. They might take a Sunday off or 2 days off. And so let's put that at about 8 hours a day, 3 shifts, so to speak. If we divide the total hours by the hours worked per day, we will get the total number of taxis at 12,500. Now, you might opt to multiply for an occupancy rate. So you would need more taxis than this to meet the demand. It's your call. Maybe you put the occupancy rate at 70 or 80%. Right? But if you look at this is a holistic top-down approach to solving the question of how many taxis are in New York. Surely some numbers could change or be tweaked, and you could give or take a couple of things. For example, you could cut the population of tourists, or you could add in an occupancy rate. But overall, this is a sound top-down approach to solving this problem. Now, let's talk about a bottom-up approach to solving the market sizing question of how many taxis are in Manhattan. You'll find that for this instance, the market sizing goes a little bit more smoothly. So first of all, we can think about Manhattan in terms of the actual area, right? I know that there are about 15 avenues and about 200 horizontal streets. So what that can do is that can actually give me the total number of blocks that I'm going to have here. Now, again, this is the bottom-up approach. So what I'm doing is I'm observing around me and kind of building up this scenario and getting these numbers larger and larger. So I know that there's about 3,000 blocks in Manhattan. And if I kind of visualize my time in Manhattan day and night, weekend and weekday, Probably on average, I see about 2 taxis per block at a time. Of course, at, Penn Station is going to be way more, and, in other parts, it's going to be way fewer, but, about 2 taxis per block, if I think about it. So if I look at that, then I know, and we know this from the previous example, but even now, if I were doing this in an interview, I would say from my conversations with taxi drivers, I know that, they work about 10 to 12 hours per day, but they tend to take a day or two off. So let's call it 8. And given that there are 24 hours in a day, we know that now there are 3 shifts of taxis. So again, if I see 2 taxis at any given time, then that means throughout the day on that block, there will end up being 6 taxis. And so if we do this multiplication out in terms of number of blocks and taxis and shifts, then we can get to the number of 18,000 total taxis. Now you will notice that this number is slightly different than the top-down approach, but it's still within the realm of reason, right? We had 12,000 in the previous answer, 18,000 here. As it turns out, the true answer is somewhere around 9, 10, 11,000. But at the end of the day, what's important is that you are within the realm of reason. And so remember, market sizing isn't about being perfectly accurate. It's not about breaking down the problem a million different ways and trying to look really smart by making it complicated. No, not at all. It is about breaking down the problem in a logical way that will let you methodically move through it, move from guessing towards estimating, and then give you a number that is, within a good realm of reason to allow you to then make an informed decision. So I hope that this top-down and bottom-up approach was helpful for learning how to do market sizing. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through a number of additional exercises to really put you to the test on your market sizing ability.